My name is Sari van Poelje. I'm the owner of Intact Academy. We give coaching and consultancy training all over the world, from beginning coaches to team coaches to supervisors. And I also am an agile business innovation designer. So I travel the world helping businesses innovate themselves more quickly than their products. My experience is that sometimes businesses have great products but are very old-fashioned, and so that delays them and they're always too late to market. So I help them speed up. One of the tools I use is transactional analysis, and we've been doing a series on the various concepts we use in that. And we're talking about psychological games here. Psychological games are unconscious, non-problem solving patterns of behavior that lead to a known payoff. It's the thing that costs organizations most, but it's also the thing that costs marriages most. So when I was an executive coach, I usually dealt with these high-placed, usually men. 90% of my clients are men. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of women in those positions yet. But so they'd come along, they'd call me up and they'd say, okay, so I want coaching. I'd go, great. And they'd say, I want coaching because I want to be a better leader, or I want to help change the organization. I said, great. So we'd have 4 sessions. At the 5th session, most of them came in a bit pensive, and I'd go, what's going on? And he said, well, we're talking about organizational change, but really my marriage isn't going so well. And I'd have a lot of these clients coming in, starting off with really big business problems and then talking about their relationship in the end. Because of course, private life and work life isn't that separated. Some people like to think so, but the patterns you have at work are very similar to the patterns you have at home. Sometimes the patterns at work are less extreme because you're in role. You're not only yourself, you're also in role. But at home, often patterns repeat themselves. So if managers want to get better, one of the things they can do is ask their partners, what do you complain about most about me? And then think about what their employees complain about. There's usually a parallel there. In any case, one of the things that costs businesses the most, I think both psychologically and financially, is the fact that people play games with each other in organizations. And also because their work life isn't balanced, really. And when these people, my clients, came with their relational problems, I said, well, I'm a really good coach and a really good team coach, but I really need to retrain myself to help them patch up their relationships. And I went out looking, and the people I found to help me were the Gottmans. John Gottman in particular taught me a lot, and I retrained as a couples coach with them. One of the things the Gottman talk about is the relational patterns that get people into trouble. And they actually predict how long couples will stay together. And what they do is they measure transactional patterns. John Gottman could have been a transactional analyst, and I'm pretty sure there must have been a crossover there. What he calls the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, we would call ways to get into psychological games. John Gottman talks about 4 ways that, in my terms, that people get into games, and that are pretty heavy predictors of relationships breaking down. This doesn't only count for marriages, it also counts for your relationships in work. So the 4 horsemen are criticism. So he talks about people who constantly criticize each other. We call that racketeering, by the way, this constant criticism. You never do this, you always do that. This constant criticism really gets people into what we call a plus-minus position. So one is the boss, the other is the victim of this, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. At a certain moment, of course, people don't take it anymore, and so it switches, and then it escalates, and that's usually the reason people have a divorce. The second horseman he talks about is defensiveness. So someone sits down and says, look, I really want to talk about my need for more contact. You come home from work, you're always on your computer, you're preparing your work for tomorrow. But hey, we've got a young family, and we were in love. Where are you? And the person who's defensive thing goes, oh, you don't understand. We could never have this lifestyle if I didn't work so hard. And they start, redefining and discounting, really, what we would call discounting. And John Gottman talks about this as defensiveness. So all these ways in which you redefine what people are saying to you and don't actually address what's happening in a dialogue. He calls that one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which predict divorce or a breakdown in relationship in any case. He also talks about contempt as a way. Contempt is really that you say, oh, you're always so stupid. Or, you have this, it's really, I'm doing this naturally. You get this expression like this, that you have contempt for the other person, that you don't respect them, that you deeply, feel that they're not okay, we would say in TA. If you have that feeling in a relationship, it's very, very difficult to connect and to solve problems together. And he says that this constant contempt, or the expression of contempt in any case, or the constant pointing out that the other person is less than you, is really one of the predictors of a breakdown in relationship, both in marriage and at work. Yeah. I remember one story. I remember I was the talent development director in one company, and we used to have these talent development days, and I brought up, some guy called Peter. Peter is very good at his job. He's been doing it. He's an engineer. He's been doing it for a long time. He's really good with his people. Why don't we promote him? And one of the board members turned to me and he said, well, you can't promote Peter. And I said, why not? He said, 20 years ago, he dropped a screwdriver in a machine. And, those machines were at that time 20 million. And so we can never promote him. And I said, it's 20 years later, why not? An engineer would never do something like that. And for 20 years, this poor guy, he dropped a screwdriver in the machine when he was 19, and they still wouldn't promote him. And this continuing kind of contemptuous way of talking about him probably, affected his work, but probably also his life. And it's a way of, that the relationship breaks down. Gottman talks about a 4th horseman of the apocalypse, what we would call a very clear sign of gaming, very serious gaming in a relationship, and we call that stonewalling. And one of the things they talk about is a good relationship. You can actually tell by the amount of relational bids people do. So they say, children naturally do relational bids. They pull at you, they go, look at this. They say, oh, mommy, I love you. This constant looking for touch, both symbolically, so in dialogue, but also real, we call that a virtual bid. And if a relationship is really good between adults, you also see a lot of relational bids. Hey, I read this book I liked. Hey, I love you. Hey, let's, And good relationship have a lot of relational bids constantly, because this constant relational bidding shows you that you're important and that you're in dialogue, you're in touch, literally. When a relationship breaks down, you see that the amount of relational bids really goes down dramatically. And one of the ways, of avoiding a relational bid is this 4th horseman of the apocalypse. They call it stonewalling. So someone does a relational bid and you ignore it. We call this the highest level of discount. And when people discount the stimulus, so what I said, if people discount the situation, we call that the highest level of discounting, because really we know that these 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are discounts. They are ways into a game, or they are even, on signals of ongoing games. If you want to break through this, you have to start at the highest level of discount. So what I'm saying is, If people discount the situation, that's where you have to start. If people then come in and say, we have to solve the problem, and people haven't even recognized that they have a problem, then there's no way forward from that. So, conclusion. If you see people doing for Horsemen of the Apocalypse, it's a sign that they're probably in a game, and very perpetual gaming, probably. And what you have to do is you have to start with the first level of discount to help them face it. So you have to start with acknowledging that the situation is this way.